Welcome to Wolfe's World. Quiet, precise, and always a step ahead. Tell us where you're listening from. Liking and subscribing helps support the channel and the next case. Now, follow the clues. Nero Wolfe and the man who sued the dead. The bell rang at 11 minutes past 2, a long, deliberate press, not the frantic jab of a bill collector. I was at my desk, shuffling Wolfe's correspondence into neat stacks that would be ignored until they reached a critical height. Fritz was in the kitchen, saffron on the stove, if the aroma meant anything, and Wolfe was upstairs in his room, orchids done hours ago, which meant the door was mine by default. I swung it open to face a man who could have been born nervous. His hat was in his hand, his fingers drumming the felt rim as if tapping out a code. He had the lean frame of a man stretched thin by worry, and his suit carried just enough shine to suggest hard wear, not fashion. His spectacles magnified wide, blinking eyes. "Mr. Kelland?" I asked, because lawyers come in only two varieties, the kind you already know and the kind who announce themselves. He fell into the second camp. "Yes, Morton Kelland," he stammered. "Attorney, I have an appointment." "You do now," I said, and led him into the front room. Wolfe did not descend for unvetted strangers, so I had Kelland on the red leather chair before Wolfe came down and entered from the hall. The man perched rather than sat, as though afraid the cushions might swallow him. Wolfe came in from the hall a moment later, moving with the ponderous certainty of a man who considered the world obliged to wait. His bulk lowered into the yellow chair without wasted gesture, his eyes hooded, his lips compressed. "Good afternoon, sir. State your errand." Kelland cleared his throat. "I represent Mr. Gregory Pomeroy. He is desirous of retaining your services. The matter is unusual, but of grave importance." His hand shook as he unfolded a sheaf of papers. "Mr. Pomeroy intends to bring a civil suit against Walter Caro, deceased these 6 months." I admit, I raised a brow. Wolfe's lids drooped further, which meant interest had not entirely failed. "You propose litigation against a corpse. Explain." Kelland's voice tripped. "The estate of Mr. Caro continues to profit from frauds initiated during his lifetime. Falsified contracts, diversion of assets, schemes that crippled Pomeroy's company. Though Caro is dead, the damage persists. Mr. Pomeroy insists that culpability is not interred with the body." Wolfe's fingers drummed once on the arm of his chair. A grotesque proposition. Yet, law has been known to stretch beyond reason. Why to me? "Because," Kelland said, leaning forward with sudden urgency, "the records are incomplete. Some have vanished. Pomeroy fears obstruction. We need evidence. We need your skill to expose what Caro concealed." I made a note in my book. Lawyers usually came armed with statutes, not pleas. Wolfe studied him for several beats, then gestured slightly toward me. "Archie, beer." That meant Fritz's domain, so I rose and went to the kitchen. Fritz was arranging a platter of herbs with his usual precision. He did not glance up when I opened the icebox for a chilled bottle and glass. "This man," he murmured in his Swiss accent. "He smells of agitation." "Good nose," I said, and carried the beer back. Wolfe accepted it without thanks, poured with slow care, and sipped. "Mr. Kelland, the eccentricity of your case tempts me to decline at once. I am not a bailiff for absurdities, but I detect in your manner that you are less concerned with jurisprudence than with peril." Kelland's hand tightened on the papers. "There are individuals who would rather the matter remain buried. I cannot say more." "Cannot or will not?" Wolfe asked. Kelland faltered. "Will not, for now." That earned him a snort from Wolfe, but not dismissal. He shifted, which was as close as Wolfe came to a nod. "Archie will take a retainer check. 5,000, payable at once. I shall hear your client in person within the week." Relief swept over Kelland's features like a tide. He scribbled the check with a trembling hand, passed it across, and rose. "Mr. Wolfe, thank you. Mr. Pomeroy will call shortly. I beg you, do not underestimate the danger." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Danger is a word much abused. Archie, see him out." I escorted him to the door, watched him fumble his hat, and disappear down West 35th. The street was quiet. Taxis lined up like yellow beetles, a fruit vendor calling his wares from the corner. Nothing sinister. Still, Kellan glanced behind him twice before turning east. When I came back, Wolfe had set the check on the desk untouched. Archie, a man does not sue the dead unless compelled by desperation or guilt. In either case, there is matter for inquiry. Or for Kramer, I said, taking my seat again. Wolfe sniffed. Phooey. Kramer investigates crimes, not lunacies. This, however, may prove to be both. The telephone rang, sharp against the quiet. I picked it up. Inspector Kramer's voice growled down the line. Goodwin, tell your boss I hear he's sniffing around Pomeroy and Caro. If he drags my office into a circus over a stiff, I'll pin the tent on him. I kept my tone light. I'll pass the bouquet along. Wolfe raised an eyebrow. I repeated the warning in shorthand. He only grunted and reached again for his beer. So the stage was set. A client suing a corpse, a lawyer quivering like a reed, and a police inspector already sharpening his teeth. It was not the strangest beginning we had ever seen, but it carried the scent of deeper trouble. And with Wolfe accepting the retainer, it was ours, for better or worse. Gregory Pomeroy arrived the following morning at 11 sharp, ushered by me into Wolfe's office where the sun struck dust motes in lazy spirals. He was a heavy man, shoulders broad, hair thick and grey at the temples, the sort of industrialist whose presence had been forged in boardrooms lined with mahogany. His tailored suit carried the faint musk of expensive wool, and his gold watch chain gleamed when he lowered himself into the red leather chair. Wolfe was already in place, seated in the yellow chair with his bulk supported in solemn authority. His eyes rested half-closed, but I had worked long enough with him to know he was alert, weighing every twitch of Pomeroy's face. I set out a fresh notebook, then leaned against the desk corner. "All right, Mr. Pomeroy," I said. "The stage is yours." Pomeroy exhaled, his large hand tugging once at the knot of his tie. "Walter Caro, you've heard the name?" "I have," Wolfe said, his voice resonant and slow. "A magnate in shipping, dead 6 months, interred at Woodlawn." "Yes," Pomeroy answered. "But though the man lies buried, his affairs live on, strangling mine. I accuse him of falsifying freight contracts, forging schedules, creating phantom shipments. The fraud bled my company, and the estate continues to profit from that theft." I jotted it down. A man suing a ghost might seem lunacy to most, but Pomeroy spoke with a gravity that demanded attention. "You had dealings with him?" Wolfe asked. "Not direct," Pomeroy replied. "My firm arranged international consignments. Caro controlled the docks, the warehouses, the manifests. I relied on the accuracy of his records. They were falsified. By the time I discovered the breadth, my stock had plummeted, my creditors howled, and Caro," he paused, his mouth hardening, "had died conveniently, leaving his estate unscathed." "Phooey," Wolfe muttered. "Convenient for him, perhaps. Inconvenient for you." He lifted his glass of beer, sipped, and set it down with care. "Name the beneficiaries of his estate." "His widow, Edith Caro. Elegant, shrewd, and altogether too guarded. His son, Alan, estranged, who now demands an early division of assets. And Lionel Arkwright, a partner who manoeuvres with fox-like cunning. They hover, Mr. Wolfe, like vultures over a carcass, waiting for opportunity." "Describe the widow," Wolfe commanded. Pomeroy's gaze slid toward the lamplight. "Poised, always in black, though 6 months is not yet eternity. She entertains with polite disdain. She denies knowledge of the ledgers, yet I am certain she destroyed papers." "And the son?" I asked. "A weakling, though resentful. He despised his father, demanded recognition in the company and was refused. Now he drinks, gambles, and claims he will expose his father's secrets if denied his inheritance." Wolfe adjusted in his chair, the movement deliberate. "Arkwright?" "Clever," Pomeroy said, his tone tightening. "Caro's shadow in business. He still controls aspects of the docks, and he profits while others starve. If Caro falsified records, Arkwright profited equally, but he escaped scrutiny when Caro's death diverted attention." I flipped a page. "And what evidence can you hand us besides your indignation?" Pomeroy's jaw hardened. He produced a folded sheaf from his inner pocket and passed it across. I delivered it to Wolfe, who inspected without haste. Columns of numbers, signatures, and routing slips. Some showed identical cargoes shipped twice to different ports, dates clashing, contracts unsigned. Wolfe sniffed. "A pattern, but incomplete. Enough to raise suspicion, insufficient to prove culpability." More exists, Pomeroy insisted, but the ledgers vanished. I believe the estate concealed them. I demand they be recovered. I studied Pomeroy's face. Sweat dotted his brow, though the room was temperate. He carried the look of a man driven by more than profit. "Why you, Mr. Wolfe?" he continued. "Because police consider Caro's sins buried with him. They say fraud without a living perpetrator is smoke without fire. I need someone who understands that the dead can still bind the living with chains of deception." Wolfe's eyes closed briefly, then opened. "You desire me to expose a fraud perpetrated by a dead man, implicating his heirs and associates." "Yes," Pomeroy said, his voice forceful. "The truth must surface." Wolfe inclined his head. "Archie, you will obtain a certified copy of the probate filings from the courthouse. I will require the names of all creditors, the division of assets, and the schedule of hearings." "That'll take legwork," I said, already picturing the musty clerk's office. "Legs," Wolfe rumbled, "are your specialty." Pomeroy leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I caution you, gentlemen. Caro's affairs were not simple swindles. Rumours of smuggling, contraband, even wartime profiteering swirl about him still. His papers, if recovered, could expose men of influence. That is why danger lingers." Wolfe drummed his fingers once, then stilled them. "I abhor danger, yet I abhor obfuscation more. We will proceed." Fritz entered quietly with a silver tray bearing sandwiches and napkins, his face composed as always. He set it down and retreated without a word. Pomeroy barely noticed. His eyes remained locked on Wolfe as though pledging his last hope. "Leave the papers," Wolfe ordered. "Archie will prepare a receipt. I will communicate when I require your presence again. For now, depart." Pomeroy rose, tugged his suitcoat straight, and extended a hand that Wolfe ignored. He looked at me instead. I guided him to the hall and the front door. Outside, the avenue hummed with taxis and trucks, the noise of midday New York pressing close. He adjusted his hat, shot one quick glance over his shoulder, then strode east with the gait of a man wrestling invisible burdens. When I returned, Wolfe had spread the papers before him, lips compressed. He traced one finger along the crooked columns. "Fraud, yes, but more. There is artifice here, Archie. The pattern is deliberate." "You mean he doctored his books like an artist painting a canvas?" I asked. "Not art," Wolfe replied. "Camouflage. The truth lies beneath, concealed by repetition." He leaned back, reached for his beer, and added, "We pursue not the dead Caro, but the living who now profit by his silence." I closed my notebook, certain of one fact. The lawsuit had ceased to be comic. It smelled of crime, and worse, it smelled of blood waiting to be shed. The surrogate's court on Centre Street smelled of dust and cold marble polish, and the echo of footsteps lingered long after the shoes had passed. I had my hat squared, notebook tucked in my pocket, and a seat near the back of the hearing room. Lawyers were already arrayed at the long oak table, their files stacked like fortifications. The presiding judge leaned back, impassive, while the parties glared across polished wood. Gregory Pomeroy sat stiffly, his jaw clenched, his heavy shoulders set like granite. Opposite him was Edith Caro, black-clad and composed, her gloved hands folded in her lap. Beside her, Lionel Arkwright's attorney whispered with the quickness of a man counting angles, while Arkwright himself sat further down, watching with the stillness of a hawk. The clerk called the matter of Caro's estate, and the judge gestured for argument. Pomeroy's counsel rose, voice sharp with indignation, laying out charges of falsified freight records, vanished manifests, and contracts that stank of fraud. Edith Caro did not flinch, though a muscle tightened near her mouth. Arkwright's counsel objected, his tone oily, suggesting Pomeroy sought only revenge cloaked in litigation. The judge rapped for order, but the tension in the room thickened like smoke. I leaned forward, scanning faces. Pomeroy stared at Edith as though her very silence proved guilt. She returned the gaze without blinking, her eyes cool and remote. Arkwright never looked at either, his attention fixed on the papers before him, though his fingers tapped a steady rhythm against the polished table. His counsel leaned in to hiss something, and Arkwright's lips curved faintly, not quite a smile. The judge questioned the status of the estate papers, and the court clerk hurried to the side table with a bundle of files. As he stacked them, I caught his glance, a quick dart toward me. He moved past and, as he brushed close, muttered low enough for only me. "Someone's been in them already. Seal was broken last night." Then he straightened and continued to his chair, leaving me with a sentence that set my nerves humming. I jotted a shorthand note but kept my eyes on the proceedings. Pomeroy's lawyer thundered about contracts diverted to phantom ships. Edith's representative countered with measured tones, dismissing the claims as speculative and unprovable. Alan Carrow appeared late, slipping into a seat at the rear, eyes bloodshot, his tie askew. He listened with restless impatience, muttering once under his breath when his mother's name was mentioned. No one else seemed to notice, but I did. The argument circled, each side slashing and parrying. The judge finally adjourned for further evidence, his gavel striking like a pistol shot. Chairs scraped, voices rose in mutters, and the hearing dissolved into knots of counsel and clients whispering furiously. Pomeroy strode out stiff-backed, his hat low, without a glance at anyone. Edith rose with slow grace, gathered her gloves, and left flanked by her attorney. Arkwright paused only to exchange a glance with Alan Carrow, a flicker quick as lightning, then followed after his lawyer. I waited until the room thinned. The clerk who had whispered to me approached, his hands still on a pile of folders. His face was pale, eyes darting. "You didn't hear it from me," he said under his breath, "but what I told you stands. The seal on Carrow's ledgers was cut before dawn. Nothing I can prove, but the files aren't as we left them." Then he straightened quickly, nodded to the judge's assistant, and turned back to his desk without another word. I stepped into the corridor where the marble echoed with receding steps. Outside, the city noise surged, taxis honking, vendors calling, the thrum of traffic on Center Street. The autumn air carried coal smoke and the smell of hot chestnuts from a corner cart. I found a cab and rode uptown, the city sliding past in a blur of brick and neon. Back at the brownstone, the office lamps glowed against the early dusk. Wolfe sat with his beer, the bottle already beaded, his expression carved in disapproval. I reported the hearing, detail by detail, and ended with the clerk's whisper. Wolfe's brows pulled down. "So, Carrow's papers tampered. Phooey. I dislike theft of evidence more than fraud itself." He lifted the glass, drank, and set it down with slow precision. "Archie, this matter accelerates. Whoever pries into sealed files fears discovery. That makes them dangerous." "Shall I lean on the clerk for names?" I asked. "No," Wolfe said. "He has risked enough. We will learn through other means. For now, note carefully. The dead man's secrets are being exhumed with claws, not spades." He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, the glint of focus sharpening. "We proceed with care and haste." The bell rang at 11:03, a long, careful press, neither timid nor aggressive. I put down my pencil, rose, and opened the door. The visitor was Edith Carrow, widow of the late Walter. She wore a black suit cut to perfection, a small veil resting against her cheek, and carried a scent of violets that lingered after she moved. Her eyes, grey and sharp, flicked past me as if to measure the threshold, then returned with a request spoken in precise tones. "Mr. Wolfe, you already know what Pomeroy is shouting. I'm not here to deny him. I'm here because something worse is missing." Wolfe's gaze did not shift. "Absurd, you say, yet the documents he presents are troubling." Her chin lifted. "Those papers are fragments, twisted for his purpose. Walter was meticulous. He kept ledgers of every transaction. Yet after his death, certain volumes vanished. They contained notes, written in symbols never meant for outside eyes. I know because I glimpsed them once when he thought me absent. I marked that in my book, watching her. She had spoken with conviction, yet her hands betrayed a tremor. Wolfe's lips compressed. "Symbols," he echoed. "Describe them." She hesitated. "Geometric shapes, circles, slashes, occasional letters interwoven. He never explained them. When I asked, he dismissed me. After his passing, those ledgers were gone." "Gone by whose agency?" Wolfe asked. Her glance slid away. "I cannot say. The estate staff swore ignorance, yet I suspect Lionel Arkwright. He was Walter's partner, and he knew where the ledgers were kept. He visited within days of the funeral. Afterward, the drawer was empty." Her voice had dropped further, almost a whisper. The lamplight caught the sheen on her cheek before she steadied herself. I wrote the name, underlined it, and studied her again. There was fear beneath the elegance, though wrapped in layers of practiced control. "Arkwright," Wolfe repeated slowly. "A financier of repute. You accuse him of theft." "I accuse him of danger," she said sharply. "Mr. Wolfe, Pomeroy imagines fraud, but the real menace is Arkwright. He is subtle, ruthless. Walter trusted him too much. If those ledgers reappear, they could be twisted to ruin my son and me." I asked, "Your son Alan, was he aware of these ledgers?" Her lips pressed tight before answering. Alan knew little of business. He was excluded, and it embittered him. He may have heard whispers, but nothing more. Do not believe otherwise. Wolfe shifted, settling deeper into his chair, eyes half closed. "You come not to retain me, but to warn me." She leaned forward. "Yes, I know Pomeroy has hired you. I beg you to consider that his suit is not justice, but revenge. Do not let him drag my husband's name through mud. He was difficult, secretive, but he was not corrupt." "Madam," Wolfe replied, his tone grave, "you contradict yourself. You acknowledge secret notations, missing ledgers vanished after his death. You speak of Arkwright's ruthlessness, yet you maintain your husband was unsullied." She drew a breath. "Walter concealed many things, but I never believed him dishonest. He lived in a world of business I did not understand. Arkwright thrived there. If guilt exists, it lies with him, not with my husband." Silence followed, broken only by the faint tick of the wall clock. Wolfe reached for his glass, drank and replaced it. His eyes opened fully, regarding her with weight. "You have delivered your warning. I will not discard it. But know this. Truth is not moulded by loyalty, nor shielded by fear. It remains, however one pleads." Her hands tightened once more on her gloves. "Then you will pursue the truth?" "Undoubtedly," Wolfe said. She rose, smoothing her skirt. "That is all I ask. Remember, Arkwright is not what he seems." I escorted her to the door, the faint trace of violets following in her wake. She stepped onto the pavement with measured steps, her figure soon lost among the passers-by. Back in the office, Wolfe sat motionless, his gaze inward. "Archie," he said, "note this. Symbols in the ledgers, removed after Caro's death. A widow evasive, yet fearful. Arkwright at the centre." I wrote it down, remarking, "She left more unsaid than spoken." "Indeed," Wolfe murmured. He leaned back, eyes closing once more. "That is why it carries weight." The morning edition lay folded on my desk, headlines fat with politics and baseball, but the story buried on page 7 caught my eye. "Clark found dead in gas accident." The photograph showed a narrow brick apartment house on Christie Street, a police wagon outside, and a line of neighbours gawking. The name leapt at me, Charles Linton. He was the probate clerk who had leaned close to whisper that Caro's files had been tampered with. Now he was dead, the report calling it an accident, the stove left open to choke the room with carbon monoxide. I carried the paper to Wolfe, who sat in his yellow chair, the orchids behind him glowing faintly in filtered sunlight. He glanced once, read the column, and pushed it aside with a finger thick as a bratwurst. Carbon monoxide is a convenient ally to those who require silence." "It's also efficient," I said. "The man whispers to me that Caro's files were touched, and the next morning he's found face down by a cold stove. I'd call that more than coincidence." Before Wolfe could answer, the bell rang with such force that the sound echoed through the hall. I moved to the door, opened it, and stepped back as Inspector Kramer barreled inside. His hat was clamped in one hand, his cigar mangled between his teeth, and his scowl could have curdled milk. He strode into the office without waiting, dropped his hat on the desk, and planted himself square before Wolfe. "Blast it, Wolfe, what the devil are you sticking your nose into?" he barked. "I've got a dead clerk on my hands, and I hear your errand boy was the last to talk with him about Caro's estate." I shut the door, returned, and leaned against the cabinet. "Good morning to you too, Inspector." Kramer ignored me. His eyes locked on Wolfe. "Out with it. What did Linton tell you?" Wolfe laced his fingers across his middle. "Inspector, you forget yourself. My client's affairs are protected by privilege. I will not repeat what a court employee whispered, whether or not he now lies in a morgue." Kramer's jaw worked furiously. "Privilege? Don't hand me that. This isn't a debate over ledgers, it's murder. The man's death was staged, and you know it." "I know only what logic dictates," Wolfe replied. If Mr. Linton died with his stove unlit and the gas open, it is improbable he did so willingly. Yet inference is yours, not mine. Kramer stabbed the air with his cigar. Pomeroy, Caro's widow, Arkwright, all of them clawing at that estate. And you planted yourself in the middle. If you think you can sit fat in this chair while people start dying, you're mistaken. Wolfe's voice sharpened. Phooey! I planted nothing. Events converge upon me uninvited. I did not solicit Mr. Pomeroy's retainer, yet I accepted it. That is my prerogative. The silence after that statement was heavy, broken only by the faint tick of the clock. Kramer's face reddened. You'd better not hold back when another body drops. He jammed his hat back onto his head and turned toward the door. Inspector? Wolfe called. Kramer halted. Wolfe's tone was cold and formal. If another body drops, it will not be by my hand. Good day. The door shut behind him with a slam that rattled the glass panes. I blew out a breath. Well, that was cordial. What now? Wolfe reached for his beer, poured carefully, and drank. Now the case shifts. Fraud is nuisance, but murder compels action. The circle tightens. I tapped the paper still on the desk. Linton knew something, and someone made sure he wouldn't say more. Arkwright's name keeps floating to the top. Wolfe's eyes flicked open. Archie, summon Saul Panzer, quietly. He is to observe Mr. Arkwright without interference. His discretion is paramount. I nodded. Saul was the best tail in Manhattan, steady as a metronome, and always with that flat cap pulled low. If Arkwright so much as sneezed in the wrong alley, Saul would know. Shall I give him scope? I asked. Indeed, let him choose his methods. He will report only to me. Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes again. Archie, the death of a clerk is not trivial. It marks the boundary crossed. The matter has moved beyond eccentricity. I picked up the phone, dialed Saul's number, and waited. His voice came, dry as ever. I gave him the assignment in plain terms. Watch Lionel Arkwright. Keep close, keep quiet, and don't let him shake you. Report only to Wolfe. Understood, Saul said, and the line clicked dead. I hung up, then turned back. Saul's on it. If Arkwright so much as jaywalks, we'll know. Wolfe grunted. He reached for his glass again. The lamplight caught the rim, and his eyes were remote. The dead speak, Archie, but not from graves. They speak through ledgers, through whispers, through the silence of a man extinguished. We must listen with care. I set the folded newspaper aside, though the face of Charles Linton lingered in my thoughts. His warning had been short, just a muttered phrase in a courthouse corridor. Now it carried the weight of his death, and for Wolfe that meant our client's lawsuit had ceased to be a curiosity. It was now a battlefield, and we had been drafted without choice. Observe Arkwright without interference, Wolfe said, then after a pause. But if circumstance grants you access to his papers, secure them, quietly. Inside, the office lamps cast a mellow light. Wolfe sat in the yellow chair, a book of botany closed beside him. He glanced at the packet with the expression of a man asked to sample vinegar at supper. Archie, he said, place it here. I set the folder on his desk and untied the string. Out came 3 ledgers, covers worn, pages stiff with age. I flipped one open and found not columns of numbers, but lines of strange markings. Circles intersected with slashes, triangles arranged in rows, letters tucked like afterthoughts between the symbols. It looked more like an architect's sketchbook than an accountant's record. Well, I said, unless Caro was practicing for an art exhibit, this isn't bookkeeping. Wolfe adjusted in his chair, peered down, and lifted a page delicately between thumb and forefinger. His eyes traced the symbols with slow care. Not art, concealment, figures disguised by cipher. I leaned over his shoulder, though I kept my distance. Could be smuggling, codes for cargo, phantom shipments. Conjecture, Wolfe said curtly. He tapped one thick finger against a set of repeating triangles. Observe. Here is recurrence. Triangles paired with circles, always beside dates. I scanned the margin. Dates from 2 years ago. Correspond with dock receipts, maybe? Wolfe grunted. Perhaps, but conjecture is not deduction. Bring me the manifest schedules from that period. The public office holds them. That's another trip downtown, I said. He closed the ledger and set it aside. "You have legs. Use them." I let that rest and watched him open the second ledger. This one bore even stranger entries, shapes stacked like ladders, letters scattered with no visible order. Wolfe studied without speaking, his face tightening in concentration. I waited, but he offered no explanation, so I returned to my desk and wrote notes while the clock ticked. Upstairs, the faint scent of orchids drifted as the ventilator hummed. Wolfe eventually rose, surprisingly quick for his bulk, and announced, "The orchids must not be neglected." He carried the ledger with him, leaving me to the silence. I sat alone until footsteps sounded from the kitchen. Fritz entered with a tray of plates, his expression calm, eyes flicking to the desk. "Mr. Wolfe works with papers at his plants?" "He does," I said, "and he's grumbling about ciphers instead of buds." Fritz placed the tray on the dining table, silverware aligned with military precision. "Dinner will be served at 8, as always." Then he withdrew, the faint clink of dishes trailing behind him. At 7:30 Wolfe returned, the ledger under his arm, and lowered himself again into the yellow chair. His lips pressed tight, his gaze remote. "Archie," he said, "record this. In both ledgers, certain dates recur aligned with symbols. The implication is traffic, not accounting." "Traffic of what?" I asked. "That," Wolfe replied, "remains concealed. But the repetition is deliberate. Caro moved something through these channels, whether goods or fraud, it is not random." I noted his words. "So Pomeroy may be right. Caro's empire wasn't clean." "Pomeroy may be right in outcome, wrong in reasoning," Wolfe corrected. "He accuses fraud against his company. I discern something broader." The clock chimed 8. Fritz entered with solemn gravity, carrying the evening meal. The aroma of roast pheasant with herbs filled the office as he set the plates. Wolfe pushed the ledgers aside, unfolded his napkin, and began with his usual deliberation. Fritz served each course without a word, then vanished once more. I ate, though my mind was still on the pages of symbols. If those ledgers mean smuggling, that explains Pomeroy's losses. Phantom shipments would cripple any competitor. "Smuggling, tax evasion, clandestine trade," Wolfe said between bites. "All plausible, but conjecture. Until I align the symbols with records, they remain shadows." The meal concluded, Wolfe returned to his chair, beer poured into a chilled glass. He drank, set the glass down, and leaned back with eyes closed. "Archie," he said, "tomorrow you will acquire shipping manifests from 2 years past. Then we may test hypothesis against fact." "Understood," I answered. The office was silent, except for the ticking clock and the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. Wolfe brooded in his chair, the ledgers stacked before him like relics, their coded marks daring us to unmask them. I watched his face, calm yet taut with focus, and understood that Caro's secrets were no longer idle curiosities. They were signals of hidden commerce, threads that could draw blood if tugged too hard. I had the typewriter keys warm by the time Wolfe lumbered in from the plant rooms. He lowered himself into the yellow chair, folded his hands across his bulk, and waited with that silent weight that meant he expected production. I rolled a fresh sheet into the carriage, cracked my knuckles, and began. "First entry," I said. "Edith Caro, widow, mid-40s, the sort who wears black silk even at breakfast. Desperate to shield the estate from scandal. She admits the ledgers once held coded symbols, claims them missing. Poised, dignified, but under pressure. Fear shows in her hands, not her voice, likely to conceal truths to preserve name and fortune." Wolfe inclined his head. "Proceed." I struck another line on the keys. "Second entry, Lionel Arkwright. Business partner, financier, reputation for clever manoeuvres. Present at probate, quick with counsel, sharp enough to keep one step ahead. Suspected of removing ledgers after Caro's death. Ambitious, ruthless. Motive to bury evidence if it ties him to fraud, or to exploit it if it benefits him." Wolfe's eyelids lowered half an inch. "So," I continued. "Third entry, Gregory Pomeroy, industrialist, wealthy, shoulders heavy with grievance, claims Caro ruined him through falsified contracts, retains us with vigour. His posture is of wronged plaintiff, but his passion overshoots. Motive, revenge or leverage, could exaggerate fraud to mask his own complicity." The keys clicked, ink forming neat rows. Wolfe's breathing was steady, the only other sound the tick of the wall clock. Fourth entry, Alan Carrow. Estranged son. Younger, mid-30s, lean, bloodshot eyes. Heir to estate but excluded from management. Resentment clear, habits poor. He mutters about exposure, perhaps bluff. Motive to reveal his father's secrets if it secures inheritance, or to destroy papers to spite both widow and partner. I drew the sheet free, squared it on the desk, and slid it across. Wolfe lifted it between thumb and finger, read without change of expression, then placed it beside his glass. "Archie," he said, "you observe, but you do not yet discriminate. Each has motive, yes. Each has opportunity, perhaps. But which speaks from desperation, and which from calculation?" I leaned back. "That's the assignment, isn't it? I prod, they twitch, and you decide which twitch reveals the nerve." He closed his eyes a moment, then opened them. "Exactly. You will contrive interviews. Stir recollection, provoke contradiction. Observe who strains, who evades, who overstates." "Start with Edith?" I asked. "Not yet. Begin with Pomeroy. He is already inflamed. Push him further. Then Alan Carrow, liquor loosens tongues, Arkwright last. He is serpent enough to sense pursuit. We must strike him when unwary." I nodded, folding the sheet back into the file. Wolfe reached for his beer, poured into the chilled glass Fritz had placed earlier, and drank with slow satisfaction. "Archie," he said, setting the glass down, "the web is woven. Our task is to see which strand trembles at the lightest touch. Do so." I rose, straightened my tie, and picked up my hat. "All right. I'll prod, you'll ponder. Let's see who squeals first." The bar crouched against the docks like a tired sentinel, its windows filmed with grime, neon letters sputtering faintly in the evening haze. Inside, the air was thick with smoke from cheap cigars and the tang of spilled beer. A jukebox murmured a trumpet line nobody was listening to, while longshoremen hunched over glasses, their caps pulled low. I threaded between the tables, my shoes sticking slightly on the damp boards, until I spotted Alan Carrow at a corner booth, half buried in shadows, a bottle standing sentinel beside him. He looked older than his years, though he could not yet have crossed 40. His hair was unkempt, his tie loosened, and his eyes carried the restless glaze of a man who drank to outpace memory. When he saw me, he smirked crookedly, lifting his glass in salute. "You're the detective's errand boy," he said. "Goodwin, isn't it? I wondered when you'd come sniffing." I slid into the seat opposite. "I'll accept the honorific. Wolfe wants to know what part you play in your father's affairs." He laughed bitterly, the sound short and sharp. "Affairs? My father's affairs were ships in the night, cargoes that vanished, papers that sang lies. He built an empire on shadows and left me nothing but scraps. Do you think I wanted his ledger books? I wanted truth, and he locked it in cipher." I kept my tone mild. "What kind of truth?" Alan leaned forward, lowering his voice though the bar's din was loud enough to mask it. "Shipments. Crates marked as medical supplies. Bandages, penicillin, quinine, noble cargo, yes? But inside were goods of another stripe. Contraband. Black market treasure slipped past authorities while the world was too busy bleeding to ask questions." I watched his face carefully. "And you know this how?" "Because I saw it," he snapped. "One night I followed him to the docks. I saw the labels, I saw the cargo swung by crane, I heard the whispers. And I know Pomeroy knew too. He was no victim. He turned blind eyes while profits flowed. Only when the spigot tightened did he cry fraud." The words slurred slightly, his hand unsteady as he poured another measure. He drank deep, then slammed the glass down. "You tell Wolfe if he wants clean history he'll never find it. My father, Pomeroy, Arkwright, they were all in it together, crooks wrapped in respectability." I let him finish, then asked, "Why tell me now?" His eyes narrowed. "Because someone killed Linton. Don't look surprised. I read the papers. He whispered too much and paid for it. They'll come for me next, maybe, unless I speak first." The room shifted then, as two broad-shouldered men detached from the bar and ambled our way. Their hats were low, their coats too heavy for the season, and their expressions vacant in that studied manner of hired muscle. One leaned against the edge of our booth, breath sour with whiskey. "Time's up, mister," he drawled at me. "You've had your chat. Now take a walk." Alan flinched, retreating against the seat. I stayed where I was. "I'm comfortable, thanks." The second man reached for my shoulder. My hand shot up, caught his wrist, and twisted. He yelped, and before the first could react, my foot kicked the leg of his stool, sending him sprawling. Glass shattered, voices rose, and the jukebox stuttered to silence. The first man swung at me, a clumsy roundhouse. I ducked, drove a fist into his ribs, and felt the breath leave him. He staggered back, cursing. The second recovered, lunging again. I caught him by the lapels, drove him across the table, and sent him crashing to the floor amid a rain of broken bottles. The bar erupted in shouts, men scattering from the commotion. The two toughs scrambled up, glared murder, but thought better of it. With a final curse, they stumbled toward the door and vanished into the night. Alan watched, wide-eyed, then poured another drink with trembling hands. "You shouldn't have done that. They'll tell Arkwright you interfered. He doesn't like interference." I straightened my tie, brushed glass from my sleeve, and leaned in close. "Then consider me uninterested in Arkwright's approval. What else do you know about those shipments?" He shook his head, eyes closing briefly. "Not enough to save myself, just enough to damn everyone else. Pomeroy wants to paint himself clean, but he was waist-deep. Arkwright held the purse strings. And my father, he was the spider at the centre." His words trailed into mutter, his hand sliding against the glass. He was slipping fast, liquor tugging him toward oblivion. I stood, dropped bills on the table, and told him to keep his head down. He nodded vaguely, already adrift. Outside, the night smelled of salt and coal smoke. Fog clung low over the river, horns sounding from unseen ships. I hailed a cab and rode uptown, replaying Alan's words in my head. Contraband disguised as medical supplies, Pomeroy's knowledge hidden until profit failed, Arkwright's shadow looming. The pieces were jagged, but they fit close enough to cut. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe was in the office, a fresh glass of beer before him, the ledgers stacked like silent witnesses. He glanced up as I entered. "Report." I gave it to him straight. Alan drunk and bitter, hinting at smuggling, claiming Pomeroy complicit, naming Arkwright as the dangerous hand. I told of the two men who tried to pull me out, and how they left nursing bruises. Wolfe listened without interruption, his eyes narrowing at each turn. When I finished, he exhaled slowly. "So, not mere fraud, but conspiracy. If Caro masked contraband as medicine, the implications extend far beyond commercial deceit." "Wartime profiteering," I said. "The kind that makes enemies who don't forgive." Wolfe's mouth tightened. "Precisely. And Arkwright sets watchers upon you, which means he suspects inquiry. That is useful. It affirms his connection." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Archie, instruct Saul to continue. Arkwright must be shadowed without pause. We must discern his associates, his movements, his hidden vaults. The truth is buried in traffic, not testimony." I nodded, already moving toward the phone. Wolfe closed his eyes, the faint hum of thought surrounding him like mist. The case had shed its eccentric cloak. With a dead clerk and hired fists prowling, it now reeked of blood and profit. Alan Caro's drunken confession had dragged the shadows into sharper relief, and Wolfe, as always, would not look away. The bell rang at 3:30, a firm but uneven press that suggested impatience under restraint. I rose from my desk, opened the door, and found Edith Caro once more on the stoop. She wore a dark blue coat with a velvet collar. The veil on her hat lowered, though her eyes were visible through the netting. They were red-rimmed, not from the cold, but from something heavier. She murmured my name with the trace of breath that was nearly a sigh. I led her in. The office was warm, the lamps lit though daylight still touched the curtains. Wolfe sat in his yellow chair, bulk composed, the faint scent of beer already present. Edith moved to the red chair opposite him, folded her gloves, and sat with a stillness that looked rehearsed yet fragile. "Madam," Wolfe said, his voice slow and even, "you return. Why?" She did not answer immediately. Her hands, small and pale, tightened on her gloves. Finally she spoke, each word clipped. "I have a confession. I destroyed one of Walter's ledgers." The silence that followed was long enough for the tick of the clock to sound like hammer blows. I leaned forward, my pencil poised above the notebook. Wolfe's brows lowered. "You destroyed," he repeated. "An act of deliberate tampering." "Yes." Her voice cracked, but she steadied it. After his death, when I found the ledger among his desk papers, I saw markings, symbols, numbers, references to shipments I did not understand. I feared what they meant. I feared scandal. I burned it. Wolfe's nostrils flared. You presume to alter evidence. Madam, that is intolerable. Her chin lifted, though her eyes glistened. Do not lecture me, Mr. Wolfe. I was alone, newly widowed, my son half drunk most nights, Arkwright prowling like a jackal, Pomeroy hounding through lawyers. I did what I thought necessary. I said gently, "What did you think it contained?" She turned to me and her voice dropped. Smuggling. During the war, Walter handled shipments marked as medical supplies. I suspect they concealed contraband, luxuries, liquor, even morphine. I feared if it surfaced, our name would be destroyed. Better ash than ruin. Wolfe leaned forward, eyes opening wider. You feared disgrace more than truth. That is vanity, not prudence. Her face hardened. Easy for you to say, sitting in this comfortable house, shielded by reputation. You have not buried a husband under whispers, nor seen your child dismissed as worthless. My duty was to preserve what remained. I felt something stir, sympathy maybe, though I kept my tone neutral. So, you believe Pomeroy's suit is blackmail? Her hands clenched. Of course. Pomeroy knew of those shipments. He profited until circumstances shifted. Now he pretends victim, waving fragments while concealing his own stain. He uses Walter's death as shield, striking at me, at Alan. He wants the estate broken, and his vengeance satisfied. Wolfe drew a long breath, then released it in a measured sigh. You understand, madam, that by destroying a ledger you arm Pomeroy. He may claim suppression proves guilt. You hand him the argument. She looked away. I know. Each night since I have regretted it, but regret cannot restore ash. The room held quiet again, broken only by the faint clink from the kitchen where Fritz was at his work. Edith's shoulders sagged, the poise crumbling for the first time. I did not come to seek forgiveness. I came because you must know. If Pomeroy presses further, you must see the nature of his claim. Wolfe reached for his glass, poured beer into the chilled goblet Fritz had placed earlier, and drank slowly. His eyes remained fixed on her. He set the glass down, his voice calm but hard. Madam, concealment is folly. You admit destruction of evidence, yet insist your husband was not corrupt. You cannot have both. She pressed her gloves together until the leather creaked. Then believe what you will, but understand that Pomeroy seeks not justice, but leverage. He would drag us all into the mud to mask his own complicity. I asked, what of Arkwright? You mentioned him before. Her gaze flicked sharply. Arkwright is dangerous. He moves with confidence because he holds pieces no one else has. I suspect he has other ledgers. If he chooses to use them, he could destroy Pomeroy, and me with him. I burned one, but he may still possess others. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. So, you tampered, yet accuse Arkwright of control. Convenient. Her voice rose, trembling. I am not shifting blame. I am telling you the truth as I know it. Arkwright thrives on secrets. Walter trusted him. I never did. She fell silent then, shoulders drawn, hands trembling in her lap. Wolfe regarded her without softness, though his eyes flickered once, the barest sign he recognized her fear. Finally he said, Very well. I have heard. Archie will escort you out. She rose, unsteady for the first time. I stood and guided her to the door. At the threshold she turned, veil trembling slightly. Mr. Goodwin, tell your employer this. If justice were truly his aim, he would not scold a widow for fear. He would strike at the men who exploit it. Then she stepped into the street, her heels clicking against the pavement until they faded. I closed the door, returned, and found Wolfe with eyes shut, his glass half empty. I waited, then asked, Too hard on her? He opened his eyes slowly. No, she deserves reproach. Yet her fear is real, and her confession valuable. You believe her? I asked. I believe she burned a ledger, Wolfe said. As for motive, that remains uncertain. Fear, vanity, or both. But the destruction proves one thing. The ledgers hold power enough to terrify. He drank again, the lamplight glinting off the rim. His voice dropped, deliberate. "Archie, we tread now in fields where commerce and crime entwine. Pomeroy, Arkwright, the widow, all are entangled. The truth waits, but each hides it beneath layers of deceit." I nodded, jotting his words. "So where does that leave us?" "Where it must," Wolfe answered. He leaned back, eyes closing once more. "With patience and with beer." The office settled into silence, the clock marking each second. I sat with my notes, recalling Edith's trembling hands, her voice hard yet cracked with fear. Whether guilty or merely desperate, she had laid another stone on the path ahead, and Wolfe, as always, would follow it to the end. The elevator operator gave me a flat look as the cage rattled up to the 12th floor, the sort of look that said he'd seen too many men ride up to Lionel Arkwright's office, and too few ride back down, smiling. When the gate slid open, I stepped onto a corridor lined with polished oak and thick carpet that muffled every sound. The brass plate on the frosted glass door read Arkwright and Company, Importers and Finance. I pushed through. Inside, the office was sleek in a way that made you conscious of the scuffs on your shoes. Chrome lamps gleamed on dark walnut desks. The air carried a hint of cigar smoke and cologne, and a large clock ticked with officious precision above the mantel. Behind a wide desk sat Lionel Arkwright, silver hair brushed smooth, suit cut so sharp you could use it to slice bread. He rose when he saw me, though his smile didn't reach the eyes. "Goodwin," he said. "Wolfe's man. I wondered how long it would take you." I returned the smile. "I like to be thorough. Your name comes up often enough." He waved me to a leather chair, then resumed his seat with casual command. "Yes, I imagine Pomeroy spits it with venom, and Edith Caro with fear. Two of the most tiresome people in New York. Pomeroy wants revenge for his own incompetence, and Edith wants to preserve a reputation her husband never earned." I leaned back, letting him talk. He liked the sound of his own voice. Arkwright steepled his fingers. "Your employer should know I had no hand in Walter Caro's frauds. Whatever he did alone. At the time Pomeroy claims these phantom shipments occurred, I was in Havana negotiating sugar contracts. Records exist, witnesses exist, even photographs if you care for tourist souvenirs. As for Edith's insinuations, grief warps judgment. She was always in over her head. I tapped my notebook. Convenient alibis. His eyes glinted. Solid ones. Unlike Pomeroy's allegations, mine can be tested. You'll find the dates, the ships, the contracts, all above board. He leaned forward, voice lowering. I admired Walter's cunning, but he overreached. He thought he could spin straw into gold forever. That straw is choking his widow now. If Pomeroy insists on stirring ashes, let him burn his hands. Wolfe closed the ledger with a grunt. "Fragmentary," he muttered. "Dates without anchors. We require schedules, ship names, manifests. Without them, the cipher is mute." It was quick work and no one saw. Then I headed for the elevator. Back at the brownstone, the lamps glowed steady. Wolfe sat in the office, orchids tended, his bulk settled like a fortress. I laid the sheet on his desk. He pulled it close, eyes narrowing. The columns were clear enough now. Ship names matched to dates, destinations scrawled beside them. Some were circled, others crossed through. Wolfe compared the sheet to the ciphered ledgers spread before him. His finger traced the symbols, then touched the dates. "Note, Archie," he said, voice taut. "The triangles correspond to the names circled here. Those are phantom shipments. Caro was not careless. He recorded fraud as though it were science." "So the widow was right," I said. "Contraband masked as medical supplies. And Pomeroy knew." Wolfe grunted. "Pomeroy profits, then howls when cheated. Edith burns evidence out of fear. Arkwright boasts innocence while concealing schedules under blotters. Pfui, the pattern emerges." He leaned back, lifted his glass of beer, and drank with slow satisfaction. The lamplight glinted against the rim, his eyes hooded yet gleaming. "We have moved, Archie, from suspicion to demonstration. Caro's fraud was deliberate, sustained, and shared. The living quarrel over its spoils, and the dead hold their silence." I jotted the words, then looked at the paper again, feeling the weight of the dates and names. Each line was a ghost ship, carrying secrets that had not sunk with Caro. Wolfe sat in his chair, brooding, the glass resting in his hand. The fraud was no longer smoke. It had shape, form, and purpose, and Wolfe would follow it to its end. The bell rang at 10 minutes past noon with a ferocity that promised trouble. I rose, opened the door, and there was Inspector Kramer, broad-shouldered, hat shoved back, cigar mangled between his teeth. His jaw worked like a bulldog's. He shoved past without invitation, stomping toward the office. I followed, already bracing for volume. Wolfe sat in his yellow chair, a book on orchids closed at his elbow. He raised his head only slightly as Kramer entered, but his eyes sharpened. Fritz's footsteps receded down the hall. He wanted no part of this storm. Kramer dropped his hat onto my desk and planted himself in front of Wolfe's chair. His voice exploded. "Wolfe, I've had enough. A clerk is dead, and every path leads back to this damn case of yours." Linton whispered to Goodwin about Caro's files, then turned up dead with gas in his lungs. "I want answers, and I want them now." Wolfe steepled his fingers. "Inspector, your volume is disproportionate. Sit, if you please." "Sit," Kramer barked. "I'll stand. I'm not here for tea. You've got your hands deep in Pomeroy's circus, and now I've got a corpse. You know more than you admit, and if you keep stonewalling me, I'll drag you in front of the district attorney myself." I leaned against the cabinet, arms folded. "You've tried dragging him before, remember? Never sticks." Kramer swung on me. "Don't be smart, Goodwin. I know you were at that probate hearing. You talked to Linton. You tell me exactly what he said." I kept my tone mild. "He said someone tampered with the files, that's all." Kramer's eyes blazed. "And you didn't think to tell me?" "I report to Wolfe," I said evenly. He turned back to the big man in the chair. "You're obstructing, Wolfe. You hide behind client privilege while people drop dead." Wolfe's voice was iron. "Inspector, you chew words as you chew cigars. It produces nothing but fragments. Mr. Linton's death grieves me no more and no less than yours would, but I will not expose my client's business to your bluster. When I have facts, I present them. Until then, you have nothing to demand." Kramer's fists clenched. "Your arrogance will bury you. Pomeroy may be your client, but he's no innocent. Edith Caro's crying widow tears, Arkwright's smirking like a fox, and Alan Caro's staggering drunk through the docks. Every last one of them is dirty. You sit here, fat and smug, while the city drowns in their lies." "Phooey," Wolfe snapped. "You are not without insight, Inspector, but you lack discrimination. Pomeroy's motives are muddied, Edith's admissions flawed, Arkwright conceals more than he reveals, and Alan's bitterness clouds his tongue. To sift truth from that chaff requires patience, not shouting." Kramer jabbed the air with his cigar. "Patience. Tell that to Linton's widow. He talked to you, then died. You think I can explain patience to her?" I said quietly, "You can explain murder, though, because that's what it was." Kramer wheeled on me again, but Wolfe cut across. "Archie is correct. Linton's death was no accident. His whisper at court condemned him. Someone feared his knowledge." The inspector's voice lowered, but the heat remained. "Then you admit this case is bigger than fraud." Wolfe lifted his glass, poured beer with deliberate calm, and drank before answering. "Yes, it is conspiracy. Caro's fraud did not die with him. It festers among the living. Pomeroy sues the dead, Edith conceals, Arkwright maneuvers, Alan threatens, and a clerk dies because truth leaks." Kramer slammed a fist against my desk. "Then give me proof. Names, dates, ships, anything I can use before another body drops." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "I have fragments, ledgers in cipher, schedules concealed, hints of contraband disguised as medicine. But fragments are not proof. To deliver them prematurely would serve only to warn the guilty." Kramer growled. "And while you brood, men die. I'm warning you, Wolfe, if you don't break this soon, I'll break you. The DA won't care about privilege when conspiracy ties around your client's neck." Wolfe set down his glass with a soft thud. "Your warning is noted. Leave it there." The silence stretched. Kramer's chest heaved, his face flushed crimson. Finally he jammed the cigar back between his teeth, snatched his hat from my desk, and stalked toward the door. At the threshold he turned, his voice gravel. "Solve it fast, Goodwin. If your boss drags his heels, you'll both be dragged with him." Then he was gone, the door shuddering behind him. I exhaled, moved to the window, and watched Kramer storm down the stoop. Wolfe remained still, eyes shut, fingers pressing together like stone pillars. "Comforting fellow," I said. "Think he'll make good on that threat?" "Yes," Wolfe said at last. "Kramer will not hesitate. He is a man of blunt force, but his warning carries weight. We must hasten." I turned. "So you finally admit it. This isn't just fraud." His eyes opened, gleaming with cold fire. "Indeed. It is conspiracy that survives death, and it kills to remain hidden. That is no longer conjecture. That is fact." The office seemed darker then, the lamplight throwing long shadows against the bookshelves. Wolfe leaned back, lifted his glass again, and drank in silence. I sat with my notebook, listening to the clock tick, knowing the game had changed. The clerk's death had turned suspicion into certainty, and the weight of it pressed on every word. The call came at 9:30, sharp as a pistol crack through the morning quiet. I lifted the receiver, and Saul Panzer's voice, steady but grim, carried down the line. "Alan Carrow's dead. Found in an alley off South Street. Shot once, close range, pockets turned out." He gave me the details. Police wagons, a crowd gathered, Kramer's men already sealing the block, then hung up before questions could follow. I stood with the receiver in my hand, watching Wolfe across the office. He sat at his desk, heavy shoulders bent over Carrow's ciphered ledger, a glass of beer untouched beside him. He looked up, reading my face before I spoke. "Alan Carrow," I said. "Shot last night. Left in an alley like rubbish." The silence was heavy. Wolfe's lips pressed tight, his eyes darkening. Then, in a voice low but violent, he said, "Damnation. First the clerk, now the son. The conspiracy silences heirs. Intolerable." I replaced the receiver, took my seat, and waited. Wolfe rose with surprising speed for his bulk, paced the length of the rug, turned and paced again. His agitation filled the room like smoke, though his hands remained precise, movements measured. At last he stopped, planted himself before the desk, and growled, "Tell me everything Saul reported." I repeated it. Wolfe listened, then nodded once. "Summon Saul here, at once." I dialed again. Saul's voice came quick. He would come within the hour. When he arrived, his flat cap low, his face carved with fatigue, he gave his account in detail. I shadowed Alan from the tavern. 2 of Arkwright's men followed as well, one heavy, one lanky. They kept distance, but they were there. Alan staggered, muttering to himself. He carried papers folded thick in his pocket. He ducked into South Street. I held back to watch the tails. Minutes later, a shot cracked. By the time I reached the alley, he was down, blood on the bricks, pockets stripped. The tails melted into the crowd. Police arrived fast. I couldn't stay close. Wolfe's eyes gleamed with cold fury. "So, Arkwright's jackals shadow him. The sun dies, the papers vanish. Motive?" Saul shook his head. "Could be anything. But it was fast, clean, not drunken brawl. It was planned." Wolfe closed his eyes, pinched the bridge of his nose. His voice rumbled. "Archie, recall Alan's drunken talk." I did. He spoke of shipments masked as medicine, penicillin, morphine, quinine. Contraband slipped under the cloak of war. He said Pomeroy knew, played along until profits dried. He swore Arkwright held the purse strings, and his father was Spider at the centre. Wolfe nodded grimly. Then Alan had knowledge enough to menace them all. His murder clarifies nothing, yet it darkens the whole. I leaned forward. "So what do we do now?" Wolfe opened his eyes. "Now we press. The guilty grow reckless when cornered. We shall give them the corner." The bell rang. I opened the door to find Inspector Kramer storming in, hat askew, cigar chewed to shreds. He didn't wait to be announced, barreling straight into the office. "Wolfe," he roared, "your client's name is smeared all over this mess. Alan Carrow's dead, shot like a dog. I want to know what you know, and I want it before another body hits pavement." Wolfe raised a hand, palm outward. "Inspector, bellow less. You waste air." Kramer planted himself square before the desk. "Don't try my patience. The kid's dead, and I've got witnesses who saw Arkwright's thugs in the vicinity. Pomeroy's screaming from rooftops that Carrow's family concealed fraud. Edith is collapsing in hysterics, and Arkwright sits smug in his office. And you sit fat in this chair, sipping beer." Wolfe's glare hardened. "You insult me, Inspector, and I ignore it only because your frustration is justified. But I will not yield client privilege." Alan's death is proof the conspiracy breathes still. That is what you may have. Kramer slammed a fist on the desk. You'll strangle on your own pride. If Pomeroy goes down, you go with him. Phooey, Wolfe snapped. I defend no man's fraud. I seek only truth. And I tell you this. Alan Carrow died because he knew what his father wrought. The killers feared he would reveal it. Kramer's jaw clenched. He turned on me. And you, Goodwin. You were the last to speak with him, weren't you? What did he say? I kept my voice even. That his father's shipments weren't what they seemed. He was drunk, but he was scared, that's all. Kramer grunted, grabbed his hat, and stomped out, the door rattling behind him. The room fell silent. Wolfe sat again, heavy and still, his fury controlled but visible. He lifted his glass, drained it in one draught, and set it down hard. Enough, he said. Archie, we strike Pomeroy. He must be baited. You will provoke him into folly, force his hand, strip his mask. He will betray himself. I asked, and how do you propose I do that? Use his rage, Wolfe replied. He is already inflamed. Whisper that I have proof, that Alan left papers, that the cipher yields secrets. He will grasp, and in grasping, reveal. Do it at once. Saul adjusted his cap. And Arkwright? Wolfe's mouth thinned. Continue. Watch every move. He will stir when Pomeroy stumbles. Between them lies the path. Fritz entered then, silent as always, setting a tray with bread and cold meats on the side table. His eyes flicked to Wolfe, noted the tight jaw, and retreated without word. Wolfe leaned back, closing his eyes, his hands steepled. Archie, go. Tonight, if possible. The conspiracy kills heirs. It will kill again unless we strike. I picked up my hat, slid my notebook into my pocket, and stood. Fine. I'll pay Pomeroy a call. If he twitches, you'll hear of it. Not twitch, Wolfe said. He must flail. See to it. I nodded, stepped into the hall, and left the brownstone. The city waited outside, restless and loud, its lights glaring against the dusk. Behind me, Wolfe sat in his chair, brooding, while Alan Carrow's death cast its shadow over us all. The club on 49th carried itself like a man too conscious of his own reputation. The doorman gave me a look that said I didn't belong, but I handed him Pomeroy's note, and he stepped aside. Inside, polished oak panels lined the walls. Portraits of long-dead governors stared down, and the air smelled of cigars, leather, and old money. A steward in tails led me through to a private room, hushed and dim under a brass chandelier. Gregory Pomeroy waited at a table set with cut crystal, his thick shoulders hunched, his face shadowed by the lamp. He rose only halfway when I entered. Goodwin, sit, we won't waste time. I took the chair opposite, set my hat on the floor, and leaned back. Fine by me. Wolfe asked me to deliver something. He's cracked Carrow's ledger. Entirely. That got him. His eyes snapped wide, hand clenching the edge of the table. You lie. Do I? I produced a folded sheet, blank except for a few meaningless scratches I'd scrawled to give weight. I set it down between us. He's matched symbols to shipments, dates to vessels, every phantom accounted for. The cipher sings now. Pomeroy stared at the sheet as though it burned. His lips parted, then closed, then opened again. Finally he muttered, If that's true, then the whole affair is damned. Depends on who's listening, I said. The names, the ports, the cargo. Your name came up more than once. His head jerked. That's impossible. Wolfe knows nothing of me. On the contrary, I replied, calm as I could manage. He knows enough. Carrow may be in the ground, but his ledgers live. You sued the dead to disguise your own stake before it surfaced. That's clever, but not clever enough. Pomeroy slammed his hand flat on the table. The crystal glasses rattled. Listen, Goodwin. Those ledgers, if decoded, don't prove fraud against me. They prove wartime necessity. Shipments mislabeled to ensure delivery. Yes, contraband slid through, but it was survival, not crime. Carrow twisted it later, turned necessity into theft. I suffered as well. I smiled faintly. That's a pretty speech, almost rehearsed. You're sweating for a man claiming innocence. His jaw tightened. Because Wolfe threatens to expose what he cannot possibly understand. Wartime trade is labyrinthine. Profiteers, smugglers, patriots, they overlap. If those papers are flaunted, reputations crumble. Mine among them. That must not happen. There it was, the admission without the word. He had feared discovery enough to sue a corpse. I tapped the blank sheet. Then perhaps you should have thought twice before dragging Wolfe into it. He doesn't bury facts. Pomeroy leaned forward, eyes glinting. Tell him this. If he values his comfort, he will return those ledgers to me. Quietly. No questions. Otherwise he risks not only himself, but you. I rose slowly, pocketing the decoy sheet. Message delivered, but Wolfe doesn't trade in intimidation, and I don't either. His fists clenched, but he didn't move. I tipped my hat, turned, and left the room. The corridor outside was silent, carpet muffling every step. But as I neared the lobby, two men detached from the shadows. Broad shoulders, flat hats, coats hanging heavy, the same breed that had tried me at the tavern. One stepped into my path. Goodwin, boss wants another word. Boss just had plenty, I said, moving past. The second reached for my arm. I spun, shoved him hard into the wall and drove a fist into the first man's gut. He wheezed, staggered. The second swung wild. I ducked, slammed an elbow into his chin, and he crashed backward into a stand of umbrellas. Patrons shouted, a steward rushed forward, and I used the confusion to push through the doors. Outside, the night air was sharp, filled with horns and the rumble of cabs. The two heavies didn't follow immediately. Club rules frowned on corpses in the vestibule. I hailed a cab, slipped inside, and gave the driver the brownstone's address. My knuckles throbbed, but otherwise I was intact. By the time I reached West 35th, the lamps were glowing steady against the dusk. I let myself in. Wolfe was in his chair, the ledgers open before him. Beer poured. He looked up as I entered, one eyebrow lifting. Well? I dropped into my desk chair. Pomeroy swallowed the bait whole. The moment I claimed you'd solved the cipher, he panicked, called it wartime necessity, blamed Caro, admitted contraband slid through, said reputations, including his, would crumble if exposed. He as much confessed without confessing. Wolfe's eyes narrowed, gleam like steel. So, the suit was your masked E. He feared revelation, sought leverage instead. Exactly, I said. And he sent muscle after me on the way out. They'll have bruises for their trouble. Wolfe grunted. He leaned back, steepled his fingers, and closed his eyes briefly. Pomeroy is undone. He sought to sue the dead to conceal his living guilt. We shall bring him to light. I rubbed my sore knuckles and poured milk from the sideboard. The city outside hummed with night traffic. Wolfe sat in silence, brooding, his bulk heavy in the chair, while the case wound tighter around us. Pomeroy had spoken enough. It was only a matter of time before Wolfe made him speak the rest. We reconvened that night to finish what the first assembly started. Nothing had changed in the chairs, only in what Wolfe was ready to say. The yellow chair stood at the head, already occupied by Wolfe's bulk, his eyes half-lidded but bright beneath the heaviness. On the red leather chairs sat the guests, Edith Caro, black dress impeccable though her hands trembled against her lap, Lionel Arkwright, silver hair gleaming under the lamplight, his mouth tight with disdain, Gregory Pomeroy, broad shoulders straining against his tailored coat, sweat darkening the creases near his collar, and Inspector Kramer, hat and coat thrown on the side table, cigar chewed nearly to pulp between his teeth, scowl deep enough to dig trenches. I stood at my post near the globe stand, notebook ready, while Fritz entered with the tray. At precisely 8 o'clock he placed before Wolfe the tall glass of beer, frosted and filled in ritual fashion. Wolfe accepted it with gravity, sipped, and set it down without word. Fritz withdrew, silent, leaving behind the faint aroma of thyme and roast from the kitchen. The door shut with finality. The tableau was complete. Wolfe cleared his throat. "You are gathered," he said, voice steady, "because 2 deaths now accompany the dispute over Walter Caro's estate. A clerk, Charles Linton, silenced after observing intrusion upon sealed records. A son, Alan Caro, shot and stripped of papers he carried. These deaths were not accidents. They were the consequence of a fraud whose shadow stretches from wartime to this room." Pomeroy shifted in his chair. "Wolfe, I retained you for a civil matter, not for—" "Phooey," Wolfe cut in. "You retained me to cloak your vengeance. Yet vengeance flounders when evidence appears. I will proceed. Edith's lips pressed white. Mr. Wolfe, I beg you. Silence, Wolfe commanded. She sank back, trembling. He turned to Arkwright. Walter Carrow maintained ledgers, in cipher. You knew of them, as did his widow. One such ledger was destroyed, another concealed, a third recovered. They were not arithmetic, but schedules, dates, ships, destinations, symbols marking cargo. Arkwright's brows lifted. And what of it? They charted shipments disguised as medical supplies, Wolfe said. Penicillin, quinine, morphine, noble labels concealing contraband. During the war, such cargoes moved unchecked. Walter Carrow profited. He did not profit alone. Kramer spat out the chewed cigar stub. You'd better have proof, Wolfe. I have correlation, Wolfe replied coldly. Cipher symbols aligned with Arkwright's private schedules, one of which Mr. Goodwin retrieved. Dates match vessels that never carried declared cargo. They were phantoms. Goods sold through black channels. Carrow, Arkwright and Pomeroy divided the profits. Pomeroy surged forward, face crimson. That's a lie. Wolfe raised a hand, halting him. Do not waste breath. You fear exposure more than punishment. Your lawsuit against Carrow's estate was camouflage, an attempt to seize initiative before others revealed the truth. But Alan Carrow, though drunken, threatened to speak. He spoke to Goodwin. He died. His papers vanished. You see, Inspector, fraud matured into murder. The room stilled. Edith's breathing quickened audibly. Arkwright leaned back, arms folded, eyes narrowed to slits. Pomeroy clenched and unclenched his fists, sweat gleaming on his forehead. Kramer broke the silence, growling. So, you're telling me these three were running black market penicillin while soldiers bled overseas? Yes, Wolfe said, not merely penicillin, all manner of contraband. But penicillin was the most lucrative. Thousands clamoured for it, and these men diverted supply for gain. Carrow orchestrated. Arkwright financed. Pomeroy consented. Edith Carrow burned a ledger, foolishly believing destruction would erase complicity. It did not. Edith gasped, eyes wide. I acted from fear. I never knew the scale. Wolfe's gaze did not soften. Fear is no shield. Yet fear alone does not kill clerks or sons. That requires determination. Kramer leaned forward, voice harsh. Which of them pulled the trigger on Alan? Wolfe shook his head slightly. That answer remains elusive, but the motive lies here, in this room. Pomeroy leaned forward, his voice cracking with fury. You think I'd risk everything for a drunken wastrel? Alan Carrow meant nothing to me. He was poison to his father, and he was poison after. Why should I kill him? Wolfe regarded him with half-closed eyes. Because Alan threatened to expose what you buried. You sued the estate not for restitution, but to appear the wronged party. A clever stratagem, until Alan spoke of contraband. That made him dangerous. Arkwright gave a short laugh, cold as glass breaking. Pomeroy dangerous? No, Wolfe. Alan was my problem. He followed me once, thought himself clever. If I wished, I could have ended him myself. Kramer barked. That a confession? Arkwright's eyes glittered. It is a demonstration. Words are not evidence. Wolfe knows that. I watched Edith. She sat rigid, her hands twisting her gloves into knots. Finally she whispered, Alan begged me to leave the city. He said Arkwright's men were watching him. He said Pomeroy hated him more than his father ever did. He knew he would die. Kramer swung on her. And you didn't come to us? You let him walk into it? She shrank back. He would not listen. He laughed at me. Wolfe's voice cut through. Enough. Alan's death was not inevitable. It was engineered. The papers he carried vanished. They would have proved his claim. Whoever holds them now holds leverage. Kramer growled. Then where are they? Wolfe lifted his glass, drank and set it down. That, Inspector, is what remains to be discovered. But know this. Both murders, the clerk and the son, stem from fear of exposure. Fear shared by all in this room in varying measure. Pomeroy sprang to his feet. I won't sit here and be slandered. I moved quick, planting myself between him and the door. Sit down, Pomeroy. Wolfe isn't finished, and neither are you. He glared at me, but he sat, shoulders heaving. Wolfe continued. Mr. Arkwright, you boast of alibis. Madam Carrow, you confess to burning a ledger. Mr. Pomeroy, you rage to mask complicity. Inspector, you see now, the fraud was not petty bookkeeping, it was conspiracy. It bound them in profit during war, and it binds them still in silence. That silence killed a clerk. That silence killed Alan Carrow. The words landed like hammer blows. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint hum from the kitchen, Fritz preparing coffee, oblivious to the storm. Finally, Kramer rose, his face carved with lines of anger. Wolfe, if you're right, I'll need more than speeches. I'll need evidence, dates, signatures, bank transfers, anything that sticks in court. Without it, I can't hold them. You've given me motive, but not the trigger. Wolfe inclined his head. And you shall have it, Inspector, but patience is necessary. The guilty, when pressed, will overreach. That moment nears. Kramer jammed his cigar back between his teeth. It had better, because if another body drops, I'll come for you too. He strode out, slamming the door so hard the panes rattled. The silence that followed was thick. Pomeroy wiped sweat from his brow. Arkwright's mouth curved in a thin sneer, and Edith clutched her gloves like a rosary. Wolfe reached for his beer, drank slowly, then set the glass down with finality. You may go, he said, all of you, but know this, I will not be deterred. The truth is mine to uncover, and I will expose it. Edith rose first, unsteady, murmuring thanks that sounded more like prayer. Arkwright followed, his smile mocking as he adjusted his cufflinks. Pomeroy lingered, glaring at Wolfe, but when I stepped toward him, he shoved past and stomped into the hall. The door closed, the footsteps faded, and silence reclaimed the office. Wolfe leaned back, his eyes shutting, his lips pressed thin. Archie, he said at last, we are close. The conspiracy unravels. Soon they will betray themselves entirely. I sat at my desk, notebook open, the ink drying on my latest line. Wolfe's words carried weight, but my thoughts were on the faces I'd just watched. Fear, arrogance, fury. One of them had ordered death. One of them still held the missing papers. And Wolfe, as always, would find the thread that tied it all. The office was heavy with expectation. Wolfe had summoned them once more, each compelled by threads he alone wove. Edith Carrow sat nearest the window. Veiled, though the room was dim, her hands clenched on a handkerchief. Arkwright occupied the chair beside her, erect, lips pressed tight, silver hair immaculate, but his eyes darted with restless calculation. Pomeroy sat nearest the desk, wide shoulders hunched, his jaw locked, sweat already gathering above his collar. Inspector Kramer planted himself near the bookshelves, hat discarded, cigar chewed, eyes fixed on Wolfe with the mixture of impatience and reluctant trust only he could summon. Wolfe leaned back in the yellow chair, fingers steepled against his vest, his gaze sweeping the assembly. Fritz entered with ritual precision, set the tall glass of beer on the side table and withdrew. Wolfe lifted it, drank deliberately, and began. Gentlemen, madam, the matter is concluded. The eccentric lawsuit that began this affair has been exposed for what it was. Camouflage. A man cannot sue the dead and win, but he may sue to misdirect. Gregory Pomeroy sought to shield himself by attacking Walter Carrow's estate. He failed. Worse, he betrayed himself through desperation. Pomeroy surged upright. That's a damned lie. Wolfe, you overstep. My grievance was real. Carrow ruined me. Wolfe raised a hand, palm outward. Phooey. Carrow did not ruin you. He enriched you. You profited with him. During the war, medical cargo was sacrosanct. Crates marked penicillin or quinine passed unchecked. Carrow diverted shipments. Contraband replaced medicine. The ledgers record it in cipher. Arkwright financed it. You, Pomeroy, consented, took profit, and remained silent. Only after Carrow's death did you fear exposure. The suit was your mask. Kramer growled. Can you prove that, Wolfe? Yes, Wolfe said. The ciphered ledgers aligned with Arkwright's private schedules. Dates match phantom ships, manifests false. Pomeroy's hand is evident in marginal initials and payment notations, legible once decoded. And witnesses recall his presence at dockside negotiations. He knew. He joined. He profited. Pomeroy's face blazed crimson. You twist ink into rope. Nothing you have binds me to murder." "On the contrary," Wolfe said, voice lowering to iron, "it binds you precisely. Charles Linton, a clerk, whispered of tampered files. Days later he died with gas in his lungs. He threatened exposure. Alan Carrow, embittered, drunk, yet perceptive, spoke of shipments masked as medicine. He died in an alley, shot, his pockets stripped of papers. Who profited from both deaths? Not Edith, not Arkwright. Only you, Pomeroy, whose mask would tear if either voice endured." Edith gasped softly, pressing her handkerchief to her lips. Arkwright's smile flickered, thin and sharp, but he said nothing. Pomeroy pounded a fist on the arm of his chair. "You fat charlatan! You dare accuse me of killing? Carrow cheated me, ruined contracts, drained my fortune." "Enough!" Wolfe thundered. The sound filled the room, silencing all. "Carrow did not cheat you. He cheated governments, hospitals, soldiers. You joined him. When the fraud no longer yielded profit, you cried injury. When discovery loomed, you killed to preserve yourself. Do not insult me with protest. The evidence condemns you." Kramer stepped forward, his scowl deepening. "That's good enough for me. Pomeroy, you're coming downtown." Pomeroy lurched to his feet, face a mask of rage. "You can't. There's no jury alive that will—" Kramer seized his arm, twisting it behind with practiced force. "Save it. You'll have your say before a judge." Edith's handkerchief fell to her lap as tears slid down her cheeks, silent, steady. Arkwright remained seated, arms folded, eyes hooded, watching as though calculating what scraps of reputation he might salvage. Wolfe lifted his glass, drank again, and set it down with finality. "Inspector, you have your man. The rest is for your office. Take him." Kramer jerked Pomeroy toward the door. The industrialists' protests filled the hall, echoing against the walls as the front door slammed behind them. Silence reclaimed the room. The silence stretched after Kramer's departure, broken only by Edith's soft sobs. She pressed the handkerchief to her face, shoulders quivering, though she strove to contain herself. Wolfe watched impassively, his eyes unreadable. Arkwright shifted at last, rising with feline grace, adjusting his cufflinks as though the scene were an inconvenience rather than calamity. "So it ends," he said smoothly. "Pomeroy in chains, Edith in tears, and myself smeared by association. Remarkable, Wolfe. You unravel knots with flair, yet you leave reputations shredded, mine most of all." I leaned against the desk, arms crossed. A reputation built on smuggling medicine into liquor and silk is no great loss. Arkwright's smile tightened. "Allegations, nothing more. You have no paper binding me, no witness untainted. I shall endure." Wolfe's eyes closed, his voice quiet. "Endure, yes. Prosper, no. Your name will carry the stink of fraud. That suffices." Arkwright inclined his head, thin-lipped. "Perhaps, but unlike Pomeroy, I still breathe, and I still walk free." He turned, strode to the door, and left without another word. His footsteps faded, leaving Edith alone across from Wolfe. She lowered the handkerchief, eyes swollen, face pale beneath the veil. "Mr. Wolfe," she whispered, "you cannot imagine what this has been. Walter gone, Alan dead, my name dragged through filth. I never touched blood money. I never sought profit. I burned that ledger because I feared, not because I shared guilt." Wolfe opened his eyes, gaze steady. "Madam, you were foolish but not murderous. I do not exonerate folly, but I distinguish it from crime. You will not face the gallows. That must content you." Her lips trembled. "Content, yes. If such a word still has meaning." I crossed to her, helped her to her feet. She clutched my arm with surprising strength. "Thank you, Mr. Goodwin, for listening, for not judging as harshly as others." I managed a small smile. "It's habit. Wolfe does the judging, I keep the notes." She attempted a faint laugh, but it faltered into another sob. I guided her to the door, opened it, and watched as she descended the stoop into the waiting night. When the sound of her heels faded, I closed the door, returned to the office, and found Wolfe as he had been, immense, immovable, silent. At length he spoke. "Archie, the matter is concluded. Pomeroy feared exposure, sought camouflage in litigation, and killed to preserve his mask. He failed. Arkwright slithers free, but his venom is spent. Edith will fade into obscurity, unpunished yet diminished. The clerk and the son are dead, casualties of greed. That is all. I dropped into my chair, flipped open the notebook. That's all, he says. You call it concluded, I call it macabre. Pomeroy sues a corpse and ends up in chains for killing the living. If I'd read it in a novel, I'd call it overplotted. Wolfe's lips curved faintly. Life often exceeds fiction. It lacks artistry, but it compensates with cruelty. The clock struck 8. Right on cue, Fritz entered, bearing the tray with roast goose and potatoes, the aromas rich and comforting. He set the plates with quiet ceremony, poured Wolfe his beer anew and inclined his head. Wolfe unfolded his napkin, adjusted it across his vest, and reached for knife and fork. "Dinner, Archie," he said. "We have earned it." I poured myself a glass of milk, raised it in mock salute. To Pomeroy, the first man in history to sue the dead and lose not only his case, but his freedom. Wolfe carved into the roast with slow precision. He lost more than that. He lost his mask. And that, Archie, is always the greater loss. I took my glass, leaned back and let the aroma of Fritz's cooking erase the stench of fraud and murder for the moment. Outside, the city clattered on, indifferent as ever. Inside, the case was closed. Wolfe ate, satisfied. I wrote the last line in my notes. A man who sued the dead and found the living less forgiving.